everyone. Welcome to another episode of Dark Rhino Security Confidential. Today we are really honored to have Dr. Calvin Nobles join us. Dr. Nobles has a very deep background in cybersecurity that goes and spans many years. He is an esteemed speaker. He's given many talks on the topic. His knowledge of finance in cybersecurity is absolutely at the top. And his has some great ideas on national security, and we're really grateful to have him on the show. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Nobles.
Well, sir, thank you for having me on the show, and I look forward to the discussion. And I love spreading the gospel of cybersecurity, and seeing how we can make it better, because this is a never-ending battle, and we must position ourselves for the long haul to win.
So, one place I thought it would be very interesting to start this conversation, because you have such a great background in finance in that sector, and financial institutions in our industry are often looked upon as some of the best guarded institutions out there. But to us at Dark Rhino, the conversation starts with understanding risk. When you invest in cybersecurity, you really should do it in alignment with the risk that your organization has. What's the likelihood and magnitude of loss from a given attack surface that you might encounter that you really need to, and that guards, if you will, the crown jewels, right?
Right.
How can you give some thoughts on how organizations should go about assessing risk, or what are some approaches there that would guide them in their investment decisions for cybersecurity?
Absolutely. I think one of the first things that organizations can do regarding risk is address it from a cultural aspect. It is an enterprise level effort. It's not something that should be just relegated to the IT department or to the chief information security officer or to the chief information officer. It is we are in an all hands evolution here regarding risk. It should be driven not necessarily from the top down, but also from the bottom up, because sometimes throughout the different layers of the organization, they see things and they need to have the ability to raise those issues without fear or some type of reprisal. And so I always say that people are sensors, and there can be some of the best information finders and give you some of the best, what we call, when I was in the military, early indications and warnings of things going on. And so you got to learn to incorporate that into your risk calculus, because at the end of the day, like if you hear me say numerous times, you can buy the best technology, you can put in the best security controls, the best countermeasures, but what's going to really get you there is really making people an active element of your risk calculus, and also understanding the human factor associated with that. And when I was on the speaking circuit in 2018, I traveled around to many industry conferences talking to a lot of senior executives in the industry, and I will always ask the questions, how many of you have completed a risk assessment recently? And everybody's hands go up. Yep. That's the correct answer. However, my second question was a little more rhetorical, and not too many hands went up on this one. And that second question always was, how many of you accounted for the human-based risk factor in your risk assessment? And that is where we stand to improve, because we see today we are dealing with security fatigue, burnout, stress at unprecedented levels like we've never seen before, because the cybersecurity threat environment is that hyperactive. It's also a very diabolical entity, right? So we're dealing with a lot when we talk about risk management, and so it really requires organizations to kind of be on their toes, be flexible, and understand a lot of different moving parts. And that's why risk management is, at the end of the day, is an all hands evolution.
And I agree with you completely. And when it comes to risk, you mentioned about people. We always try and preach the gospel of people are your biggest cybersecurity asset, actually, right?
Right.
They are the one most underutilized asset in the company, actually, when it comes to cybersecurity. In fact, you go to most companies and you ask the average person, do they know what's going on in cybersecurity, or have they had training on it? Now, some people may have had some phishing training, but by and large, it's like a nebulous term to them. It's like a bunch of people sitting in a dark room somewhere doing something. I think those people, if we can empower them get
Yes.
them involved in the conversation. They have a lot to say, and the culture that you bring up is absolutely key because if we can have an environment where people understand the why are not just have a policy, but they understand the why, then they will proactively look out for certain types of behaviors and actions, and they might be the earliest indicator of compromise.
Absolutely. The people element is so critical to what we're doing in cybersecurity. And that's why you heard me talk a lot. I've been a real advocate for the human factor in cybersecurity. And part of that is because I just recently finished a PhD in human factors, but I've been studying human factors in cybersecurity for years. And I kind of like to compare cybersecurity to aviation and to some cases what they've done in medicine regarding the human factor. Those are two different domains where we've seen a lot of errors. We've seen people go into a hospital to have a procedure done, and when they come out, they had the wrong procedure performed. And aviation, we've seen countless incidents of just crashes and other hazardous dealing with airplanes and dealing with people. And so there's a lot to learn from those domains. And we kind of, when in cybersecurity, we kind of trail behind those industries regarding, placing people at the center of our operations. And so I'm a huge advocate of human-centered operations, meaning placing people at the core, and everything else is built around the people. Because at the end of the day, people and cybersecurity are inseparable. No matter what we look at in cybersecurity, you can't separate it from the people. And so having a well-trained staff who are securely aware of the environment and the threats and risks can go a long way. Now that's easier said than done, because when you start talking about the daily tasks that our people are responsible for doing, that we're responsible for doing, there's a lot of wear and tear on the person. And so we need to start not only just thinking about it from a risk aspect, we also got to start looking at it from a human aspect with a lot of attention paid to human performance. Because over time, if you're not careful of how hard you're pushing your cybersecurity professionals, you can really burn them out and wear them down to where there's a degradation in their efforts.
And you set that up for my next question: is what are some lessons we can actually learn from the aviation industry where fatigue has played a role in so many crashes, right? And then the industry has actually stepped up to the plate and has started to really address some of those factors.
Right.
And it's not, we see some of that in our own industry here in cybersecurity.
Right.
What are some tips or guidelines you might be able to give on that we need lessons learned?
Right. So one of the things that I love talking about is called the Dirty Dozens.
Okay.
It's a group of aviation researchers came together and they highlighted 12 dangerous attitudes that can degrade aviation operations or make aviation more inherently risky than what it already is. And when I looked at the Dirty Dozen, they were parallel to cybersecurity. And some of them like complacency, some of them is like over reliance, and there's 12 of them, and I don't remember all of them off the top of my head. But one of the things we need to do is identify dangerous attitudes in cyber, and what that helps us understand is give us mitigation strategies to those different attitudes. Say for instance in aviation, when I was flying, when I was much younger than I am now, one of the things one of the dangerous attitudes, was get home nighters. I mean, everybody was ready to get home, right? So you bump up the throttles, you start cutting steps out, you start doing things, and when you start doing that, you have to take a step back and say we are making what we're doing more inherently dangerous. So in cyber, you see some of the parallels because people just want to get things done at the end of the day, and so sometimes we implement controls and other measures in place, and it makes people circumvent what we have done. The reason people circumvent the countermeasures that we put in place is because things have gotten too complex for them. And so, just like in aviation, we know where the cognitively demanding functions are. We know what those tasks are. And so, we allocate certain time, and sometimes we put, two people involved in those tasks and functions because they're just too demanding. Like for instance, if you ever had the opportunity to sit on a flight deck, you would notice when the pilot is flying, you got one pilot flying, the other one's running the checklist, doing all the communication, and then they're working and they're talking through things. And we need to have that same flow in cyber. We need to identify some of our more riskier tasks and functions and label them as such so that we can put mitigation strategies in place. For instance, like merger and acquisition. That needs to be number one on everybody's task when we're talking about cybersecurity, because there's a lot of risk associated with that. And so if we can identify some things like that and start working in parallel and borrowing from the healthcare and the aviation community, I think we can start to reduce some of the errors and some of the problems we see in cyber.
I know you might remember the exfiltration of information from Target, right?
Yes.
And in that case,
Yes.
their systems were actually telling them something's wrong, and they were just choosing to ignore it or turn the alarm off, right?
Right.
Could human factors have been a huge player in that?
Uh,
We don't know.
Absolutely, because one thing, even when I was going through my aviation training, and even when I was part of the squadron, when you got a warning indication, you never just wish that warning indication away. You had to investigate it, right?
Right.
So we have to teach our cybersecurity professionals, and not just our cybersecurity professionals, but all of our employees. If you get a warning or something doesn't seem right, stop, ask questions, inquire, elevate it to the next level for assistance if you need it, if necessary. And by doing that, I think that we will become more cognizant and we become more aware of some of the things in our environment.
Again, on risk, have you seen in your experience any particular framework that does a better job of risk assessment, whether you look at NIST or you look at the FAIR model or any number of other models out there? Is there one that's a favorite for you?
I would have to say that the NIST framework. I really like the NIST framework. I was there. I shouldn't say I was there, but I remember when we first started, utilizing the NIST framework. To me, it just made sense. And it still makes sense to this day. So I'm a fan favorite when it comes to the NIST. However, there's other frameworks out there that's just as effective as the NIST framework. And so when it comes to a framework, what I tell people is try not to get and so involved that this is the only framework you think of. Also pay attention to some of the other frameworks, because some frameworks call out certain areas more so than others. Like again, ISO 27001 is very good when it comes to user-centered design and does a much more better job with it than the NIST framework. So there's some things that you can leverage from that particular framework that the NIST framework might not focus on as much. So I think a hybrid of a little bit from each one of them can get you there. And I just think that they each serve a purpose. But I'm a big fan of the NIST framework. It really makes sense from a business aspect as well.
There is a lot of, one would say, tie-in between cybersecurity and national security. Right?
Yes.
Right. I think it's
Yeah.
a new battlefront.
Yes. Absolutely. When I was in the Navy, I spent some time working inside of the intelligence community, and I spent some time at one of our national level agencies. So it was very natural to become an expert in national security. National security is so important for the advancement of our country, and not just necessarily our country, but for the global environment as well. The United States plays such a critical role. And when we talk cybersecurity, you look at what our government has done, what our private industry has done in terms of building these very robust networks and systems and this infrastructure. We rely on these things daily. Our organizations, whether it's private or public, they have invested significantly in this infrastructure. And because of this, the expansion of globalization, the advancement of different technologies, it makes it easier for our infrastructure to become attacked. And so when we're talking about national security, we just can't look at the federal government anymore. We have to look at critical industries as well, because if you look at our most attacked industries, you can see where our adversaries, state sponsors, non-state sponsors, hackers, cyber criminals, whoever it may be, are targeting certain industries more than others. And because they're targeting those industries the way they are, it's very strategic.
Right.
And it's looking like cybersecurity is becoming our underbelly. And because people are targeting our underbelly so much, we're having to take very progressive steps to secure that underbelly. And we're having to do that through the national security. Now we have U.S. Cyber Command, we have a very robust intelligence community, but that's not enough. We have to partner with our private industry and our private organizations, and also our non-profit organizations as well as academia. We need to build that bond because national security, it does primarily rest on the shoulders of the federal government, but it also rests on the shoulders of the rest of us too, because we are so interconnected from a technology aspect. It's almost impossible to separate it. I wrote a paper about a year ago, maybe about a year and a half ago, and it's called "Disrupting the United States National Security Through Financial Cybercrimes."
Really?
And again, I view our cybersecurity infrastructure and what we're facing in terms of cybersecurity as our new underbelly, right? Because it's kind of exposed. It's kind of area that's exposed right now, and we're working as diligently as we can to protect it. But like you said, you can't separate what's happening on the federal side or what's happening on the public side from our private partners, because we really rely on each other for very unique services. And anytime there's an attack against the United States, in my perspective, our national security is threatened, but so is the global international security level is threatened, because the United States is such a critical player on the international stage. And so when companies see that the United States being attacked, the first thing they're thinking, imagine what that's doing psychologically to countries who's not as advanced or capable as the United States. It's messing with them psychologically, so they're saying, wow, if this happening to the United States, what can happen to us?
So in your paper, when you what were some of your findings that can you elaborate on some of them that you found with affecting national security with cybercrime? That's very interesting.
Yeah, so one of the things that one of the findings that I discovered was that between 2016 and 2018, the financial industry was one of the fastest growing industry in terms of cybersecurity protection, that was investing significantly to protect those assets. And this was just not in the United States. This was internationally. So that gives you an idea of the investment by these financial institutions, of what they were dealing with from a threat and a risk aspect. So to have them to invest significantly in that. The other thing I determined was that banks and other financial institutions are in the business of providing services. And what's unique about that is the more services that we provide to our customers, the larger our attack surface becomes. And because of that, that plays into the hands of nefarious agents. They're able to capitalize and take advantage of that. And so one of the things that I recommended one of the outcomes of my paper was that we take a look at enhancing our authentication for customers and anybody who's trying to access whatever type of financial services entity while they're at home or somewhere out and about. And one of the other things I made was not to access these type of services when you're on a public Wi-Fi unless you are really skilled and know how to protect yourself, preferably to do it at home, and also how to enhance your mobile devices so that they are more secure, so that you can have that mobile banking on the ease. I got a call from a good friend of mine on Friday afternoon, last Friday, and he said, "Hey man, you're not going to believe this, and I had to share this with you because I know you would get a kick out of this." He said, "I'm talking with the CEO of a company, a small company," and he said they just been hacked. And so I started talking with the CEO about managing her platform and everything, and he was like, "She's never changed the password. She's never changed her password, and her employees have never changed their passwords." And I'm not saying this to pick on small companies. I'm saying this to highlight how we need to start getting the words out, and we need to start partnering with small companies to ensure that they understand because you're a small company, it doesn't mean that you don't stand a chance of being hacked. Because in fact, as a small company, you're more of a gateway into a larger company because you're going to be partnering and probably in somebody's supply chain. So that's why you are a target. Uh, so you can be that gateway into somebody else's network. I went to the DuPont Summit about in 2019, and I did a presentation on businesses leveraging the dark web to conduct business because of the security aspects of the dark web. Should we look at the dark web as a business medium?
Now that's very interesting. I would venture that most people have never been on the dark web, have never gone there, and
Yes.
explored a lot of the sites and things that and groups that are going on there.
And I would say that's a good thing because the dark web is a lot. Well, a lot of the pros play at that level, and if you're not careful, you can expose yourself there and become a victim.
Quite easily.
Right.
But you can also look at how the chain of trust is created, right? So you
Yes.
you can outsource cybercrime today. That's no big secret. With $500, I'm sure I could get somebody in Eastern Europe to do some things that
Yes.
that are not good, right? I'll leave it at that. But the chain of trust that it would take for me to get into that circle to be able to execute that,
Yes.
maybe something that's noteworthy of studying from and seeing if that can be applied in conventional business in doing the right thing.
Right. Even just if if you say company A and company B work together to use the dark web to conduct their transactions, because those two entities know who they are, they can meet on the dark web, conduct their transactions, and don't have to worry about transmitting over what we call the internet anymore,
See,
the regular internet.
so how I don't know if you remember, but way back when, I'm going to turn back the clock to the late '80s, or early '90s. Hey, I was a young man back then, but it's. So anyhow, there was a book and a program called PGP, Pretty Good Privacy. That was,
Yeah.
remember that? And
Yeah, I do.
and there you could use it to send encrypted emails, and the whole thing was that you created your public key. It's still used today. That's what public
Yes.
private key encryption is for all our listeners. But you managed those keys. You dictated who you gave those keys out to. Now that is that's a fairly, it's pretty good privacy as it implies, right? It's not 100%, but it's pretty good. That's kind of the process. What you're saying between two companies. If we have that exchange of sessions of quote unquote keys, then you know who I am, I know who you are, and we're cutting out everybody in the middle as part of it.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, personally, I think it's a great idea. Of course, I haven't really explored it any further than that. I just talked about it. I researched the conceptual. Yeah, and not only that, when we talking about the dark web, we're talking about an entity that's about 700% larger than the internet that we see, right? So we don't know what we don't know about the dark web and what's out there and who's operating in it.
Do you think that most businesses have they transitioned to seeing cybersecurity as a business problem and not an IT problem?
I think for the most part, most businesses have transitioned over to it being an enterprise issue than an IT issue.
Okay.
But it also depends on how the leadership, I'm talking about, and the partnerships between the chief information officer, the chief information security officers, and the chief risk officer are really pushing that agenda, because it should be across the board. Everybody's involved, because it doesn't necessarily have to be the IT department. It could be anybody that's being a vector or being a target, and so you have to treat it as a whole. And I think as long as with the the amount of play that the chief information officers are getting, the amount of attention that the chief information security officers are getting, I think everybody's beginning to see this as an enterprise level problem.
Is there, well, let me ask this. Have you seen, because we haven't seen this much, where the CISOs do not report into the CIO? They've actually been separated out as a separate function altogether from IT.
I have a lot of friends that are CISOs, and we talk several times a week, and most of them feel that by reporting to the CIO, that their agenda is not as clear as they would like to make it, because the CISO has a role of reporting the facts and what it is, and that information needs to be unfeathered. It doesn't need unfettered. It doesn't need to be changed or modified. It needs to be what the CISO is seeing from his or her lens, and that's how it needs to be carried out. It doesn't need to be vetted by anybody else, because a lot of CISOs believe that that's what's changing the overall interplay between cybersecurity and some of the other priorities across the organization. I heard someone make a comment earlier today. I was on a phone conversation with someone, and they would say most cybersecurity programs are getting what they deserve, not what they don't. They're not getting what they need. They're getting what they deserve, right? And so, as long as we have that type of thinking and that type of mentality, that's going to be problematic. But I'm also a proponent of thinking that the cost of maintaining these cybersecurity programs are becoming really robust, and that it's not sustainable. If you look at it on a 15-year trajectory, the cost of what these companies are paying for cybersecurity, you can't sustain it. And so somebody asked me, well, if you were in charge, what would you do, Calvin? And I say, this is exactly what I would do. I will take a look at how we can make humans stronger than what they really are. How do we design systems that we design them to the natural abilities of humans and not to counter the natural abilities of humans? And they were like, well, how would you do that? I was like, think about it. We forget our passwords. I forget mine sometimes. You forget yours sometimes. So why don't we design systems where we don't need to use passwords? Can we use biometric authentication? Can that work? Because that's how you design systems to where you don't have to have humans calling down to the help desk, changing their passwords every other month because they done forgot their password, or writing it down, leaving it on the desk or inside of the desk drawer or somewhere, or putting it in their purse getting stolen, right? So how can we avoid all of these things and make systems that are more favorable for humans?
I think that there is a over reliance of tools in our industry.
Oh, yes.
You think?
Yes.
So for everything there's a tool, and everyone's pitching a tool, and I think if you could have every tool, and even if you integrated them all together, whether it was AI based, not AI based, whatever you have, you still wouldn't have a 100% secure organization.
Right. There is no such thing as 100%, right?
There is no such thing, but process.
Yes.
Right? Understand the risk, put in a process to guard against the risk that you care about. The stuff that you don't care about, acknowledge it and accept it, right? What can you do with risk? You can accept it, you can transfer it, or you can mitigate it. You got three choices there. So
right.
If you do a good job on the risk up front, then you can look at the processes that surround the risk that's relevant to you and really architect those processes well and make those people friendly, bring people into that conversation, enable them to do the right thing. Then you do need tools. I'm not beating on the OEMs, I'm not, but it just seems like everywhere I turn, here's a new AI thing. And we try, as a cybersecurity consultancy and a managed services provider, to really say, look, it's not the tool, it's really the people and the process behind this that's going to make all the difference in the world to you.
Yes, absolutely. What you just said is so important, is that, I was reading LinkedIn a couple of days ago, and there was a chief information security officer. I forgot what she worked, but that's not important. But the point is, she said she fielded a call on the weekend from a vendor to her personal cell phone number. So that vendor has figured out how to get her personal cell phone number and call her on the weekend. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, God bless her, because I would have just hung up the phone and turned off my cell phone. But she entertained the individual. I mean, she was very cordial about it. And I think, to me, that example that she made available to us is a bridge too far. I think that, we have to restart, for vendors, they really have to start understanding who they want to work with, and also how can their product enhance what our chief information security officers need. You don't need to call 15 chief information security officers a day, because you don't really know what their environment is like. You haven't even developed a partnership with them, and you might not. That's not the best way to build that relationship. So do a little homework and invest some time into understanding that business, so you can develop that partnership with that chief information security officer, so you can get a better picture of what his or her needs. Don't get me wrong, I am fascinated with the amount of technology we have in cyber, right? I must admit, I'm a junkie. I'm a technology junkie. I enjoy it. I think it also shows our growth and maturity as an industry, and the skilled people we have, right? We have some extremely skilled people in our industry. And so we're able to develop some of the best technologies much quicker than we were able to do in the past. And so that's an indicative of our growth of our industry. So that is a pat on the back for us. I just think that organizations have to figure out which technologies do we need the most based on what we're trying to achieve from a business need, and go from there. I've seen organizations that will bolt technology on top of technology, and they will bolt on so much technology that it will exceed their organic capabilities, and they will have to go out and bring in all these specialists to help them understand what they have built, because they don't even know what they have built at that point. How do we as leaders work through our unknowns to protect the business?
Yeah, that I would love to see more businesses have that conversation internally and really look at it in those terms. What are we covered for? What's our real attack surface? What are we guarding?
Right.
Right. And then have these other discussions, and it might make a lot of sense. But
yes, I think so.
So, we're getting here towards the hour, but I want to give you a chance to talk about some other interesting findings and things in your experience that you would really like our audience to know about from a cybersecurity perspective.
Absolutely. And I must say this, I had this discussion today with a new friend of mine, and he's well known in the human factors field. In fact, he's also supporting several entities from a cybersecurity perspective. And I encourage more people who are interested in working in cybersecurity to look at human factors as a field, because it's an emerging field right now, and we're beginning to see more usage of human factors. We're beginning to see it in terms of user experience, user interface design, designs, and as long as those fields stay around, they're indicative of what we're looking for in human factors. But human factors is really a scientific discipline, and it's been around for 80 years. And it's applicable to cyber, because in cyber we are a socio-technical field. We have the huge technical aspect to it, but we also have a huge people side to it, and we have also a huge organizational side to it. And so I just encourage people, if you're thinking about something you want to do, don't sleep on human factors. Human factors, a mixture of psychology and engineering together, and I love talking about the need of psychology in human factors. I went down to the NICE Expo in 2019, and 2018, and I gave a presentation on the psychological, the needs for psychological professions in cyber. We need psychologists who can help us understand human behavior. We need behavior analysts that can help give us, a true analysis on our behavior, not what we say, but what we do. And we need human factors people to come in and help, develop a human factors program inside of cyber. So, I hate to be selfish, but that's my plug, and it's a selfish plug. But again, we need more people who understand cyber to also understand human factors.
You know,
I just designed a course for a school out on the West Coast, and I'm currently teaching there. It's the Human Factors in Cybersecurity course, and we take a look at human performance, cognitive awareness, culture, situational awareness, the history of human factors, the socio-technical system. So we really get into several different topics in the field to help give the students a more broad understanding of how we can look at the human aspect in cybersecurity.
are you going to be appearing on any shows or have any books or anything that you would like us to know about, Calvin?
You know what? I'd like to give a selfish plug out to a good friend that I actually met over the last week and actually talked to him earlier today, and that is Ira Winkler has a book, and it's called "You Can't Stop Stupid," and I can't put the book down. I mean, I'm supposed to be working on all kind of research right now, and I can't put his book down because he gives such in-depth, explanations on how we can eliminate user-initiated losses inside of organizations. So I get out to Ira. He's a hardcore human factors guy, and again, the book is fabulous. I can't put it down.
I would love to make that the title of this show, actually. with a title like that, how can you not?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Calvin, I really appreciate you taking the time. We're at the hour here. I don't want to hold you past your commitment to us, but thank you so much for coming on the show and letting our listeners, enlightening us with a little bit of information here on your extensive experience in cyber.
Thank you very much, sir, for having me on the show, and I look forward to being in communication with you and talking with you lately. And maybe when I am going to write a book on human factors, and when I get that book published, I'll come back and talk about it.
We would love to have you back and have you talk and explain it to us. Give us the Cliff Notes.
Absolutely. So I'll give you a hint. So one of the things I'm writing about right now is there's a section of the book called Dog Tire. It talks about all the different types of fatigue that people deal with from a cybersecurity aspect. And the last time I stopped counting, due to my from my research, there were 12 different types of fatigue that the average person deals with in cybersecurity.
There's so much repetitive activity and so many repetitive tasks that have to be done, and they have to be done well. It's like the pre-flight checklist. You got to go through it.
Yes. Yes.
If you don't,
absolutely.
Are your flaps down? Oh, I didn't check it. Well,
we don't know.
Well, that might not have a good outcome,
You're right. It could have a very disastrous outcome in some cases.
Well, all right, Dr. Nobles, take care, and you have a great rest of your week.
You too, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.